911, what's your emergency?
Yeah, this is Hank on Old Gray Road.
What is it this time, Hank?
It's the Bigfoot again. He's back. He's just standing there.
Listening to You Had Me at Bigfoot with your hosts, Tom,
1 to 5 Bigfoots,
and Dustin.
Holy Batman.
Remember, you can always contact the show via Twitter at You Had Me Podcast, on Facebook, You Had Me Podcast, or by email, contact at youhadmeatbigfoot.com. Now your hosts, Tom and Dustin. So you're walking through the woods, knee-deep in pine needles, just having a good time in the woods. Sun's setting off in the distance, and through the trees you can see the beams of sunlight coming through to you. And you take a moment, you take a big deep breath in, eyes closed, then right when you open your eyes, there he is, an 8-foot tall Bigfoot. Is there anything else in this world that you would be more afraid of encountering in the woods than that Bigfoot?
Hillary Clinton.
That is the correct answer.
Today on the show is a special day because You Had Me at Bigfoot. And today is the first show that we're actually covering Bigfoot.
How about that? This is episode number 4, and we have made no mention whatsoever
Of Bigfoot. But guess what? Today, we're covering Bigfoot. I'm excited.
We got a guy coming on the show today. His name is Matt. He has his own YouTube channel. He has a Twitter dedicated to it, talking about Bigfoot. And this guy he's the resident expert. This guy is the most knowledgeable guy on Bigfoot I think I've ever had the pleasure of encountering online. He's a very humble guy. He keeps telling me in these emails while we were setting up this interview, he kept telling me that he's not an expert. I'm not an expert. I'm an armchair expert. I just do a little bit of research. But this guy, he's got a lot of really good content that I think everyone's going to get a kick out of. So without further ado, Mr. Mattsquatch, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah. 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 Oh, that's good. No, thanks.
Honestly, we can just transition right into it, and just, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into researching Bigfoot or finding that you had an interest in Bigfoot.
Okay, well, I've always been interested in Bigfoot for a long time. Since I was a little kid, I've always just found it fascinating. I should tell you that my mother is an anthropologist. She has her degree in anthropology. So it was always kind of, and she went to school in the late 60s, early 70s when, it was the great Dr. Grover Krantz and the whole Bigfoot thing. And she went to University of Idaho. And up there in the Pacific Northwest, there's really a big culture of Bigfoot. And especially in the 60s and 70s before, the rest of the country would be like, what's a Bigfoot? But up there, everybody kind of knew what it was. So, growing up, it was always kind of one of those, what if kind of a thing, like what if Bigfoot existed and what do you think? And it was always kind of one of those anything possible. It wasn't taken too seriously. It was just like one of those Loch Ness monster, hey, I saw like your UFO guys, like, hey, I saw something in the sky. It was always just kind of one of those what if open mind things until in 2013, I actually had 2 encounters in 2 separate locations in 2013. What happened was the first one, I was out coyote hunting in the Sierra Nevada mountains with my brother-in-law, and we were posted up in this field and we were call blasting. If anybody's ever coyote hunted, it plays these god-awful calls like a wounded rabbit or a dying calf and all these strange things, and it was echoing through the canyon, and we're all camouflaged out and hiding in the bushes like hunters do. And we were sitting there for a while, and eventually we're way back there. We're miles we hiked down a gated dirt road. We're way up in the Sierras in the middle of nowhere. And it was getting kind of dark, and I could hear something crunch around me. And to keep the story short, basically I got a rock thrown at me. It was the rock the size of a football whizzed over my head. And it was very scary. And about that point, it was starting to get real dark, which hunting time was over. And we hiked out, and on the way out, we could hear something trail us. And every time we turn around, look down the road with our flashlights, we couldn't see anything, but you'd take a few steps, and then you'd kind of hear a few steps, and the hair standing up on the back of your neck. It was a very, very odd experience. So I was aware of Bigfoot up to that point, but when that encounter happened, it really kind of spurred my interest, because what else in the woods can throw rocks? Bears don't throw rocks. Eagles don't drop rocks. So it was kind of one of those things, and it kind of ruled out people, because who would be dumb enough to throw rocks at somebody who's sitting there with an AR-15 in the bushes? So that was my first encounter. And from there, I really, really started to get into it. I mean, I was kind of into it before, kind of would watch a TV show or something. But, you know, after that is when I started to read a lot of books, every book I can get my hand on. Dr. Jeff Meldrum's books, Dr. Bendernagel's books, watching the TV shows, listening to podcasts, watching videos, and then occasionally going out in the woods and doing my own research, which, you know, really more or less just a guy out in the woods. These things are very hard to study. And then in 2013, in a completely different part of California in November, my wife and I were staying in a cabin, and we had the house thumped on in the middle of the night, this big whoosh thump against the side of the house. And the two dogs that we had with us were really cowering and had their tails between their legs and were whimpering, and they were really scared. And I could hear something out there, kind of low guttural growling. And this is in the Southern California mountains, so we don't really have grizzly bears. And in fact, on this mountain where we are, we don't even have bears at all. We don't even have black bears. So it was a real scary experience. The next day we had acorns and rocks thrown at us and stuff, and the dogs were whimpering. So in both of my encounters, I never actually saw a Bigfoot per se, but they were both very suspicious. And from what I've heard and gone on to research, the two activities of thumping on houses, throwing rocks, growling, intimidation, the hair standing on your neck, these are all things that Bigfoot has been known to do. So it just kind of took off from there.
You said you were in Southern California when all this happened?
The first encounters was in the Sierras, which was just east of Sequoia National Park, if that kind of gives everybody a reference. So we were way out in the woods, and we were in Sequoia National Forest where it was legal to hunt, and that's where we were hunting, and I got the rock thrown. 6-7 months later, the other end of the year, towards November, I was in Idlewild, California, which is a little mountain town that we have down here. It's kind of the next mountain over from Big Bear. And that's when I had the house thumped on and dogs intimidated and stuff. So I had two separate encounters in two separate areas.
From your videos and your posts and everything, I saw that you had kind of a theory, or whatever the case may be, whether it's something that you found throughout your research, but there are multiple types of Bigfoots from what I can gather. I think you said 4 that I was tracking, 4 different types of Bigfoots. Is there any way you can kind of go just briefly? I don't expect you to, do a whole essay or anything on each one, but just kind of like where are they? What's the difference? What's special about each particular one? Something like that.
Yeah, that'd be no problem. There's 4 different types. That's kind of the basics that most Bigfoot researchers kind of get into. We say types. We don't know if they're species or subspecies or a different genus or how closely related, or if they're all the same species but just regionally different. I actually talked to Dr. Jeff Meldrum about it, and he said that in his opinion, from what he's heard and from what he's seen from the footprints, all the footprints are very similar. So he thinks they're all the same species, but they're just different type forms. Kind of like how a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are both the same species. Or you could have a 5-foot tall Inuit Eskimo and someone from Africa and then someone from Russia. 2 or 3 different people all look completely different, but we're all the same species. So to break it down for you, there are probably 9 or 10 different things people are seeing in the woods that are consistently thought of being Bigfoot or Bigfoot related or cryptid field. But there's the 4 basic types that across the board, across the United States, that people are describing. Now, the first type is the most common type, which everybody refers to as the Patty type. That's from the Patterson-Gimlin film. That's the 1967, the classic black and white, where you see the thing crossing from left to right, the video that everybody's seen seen. It's the same thing they cut out for logos and you see in everything in Bigfoot. And that's your classic patty type. And they describe that type of Bigfoot as being very gorilla-like. It looks like an upright rocking gorilla, like a real-life King Kong. And these ones are described, they're all over the United States. There's one thing, a lot of these subspecies or types or whatever you want to call them, we'll call them types. They tend to be in different areas, but there's a lot of mix. Like there's a lot of overlap, but we're just going to speak in generalities. And like I said, I could be way off. This is all just from what people's reports and the research that I found and listening to lots of people give their accounts. So the type ones, the patty Bigfoots, they get these are the really big ones. They get 10, 12, 11, 14 feet tall. They get really, really big. They get 4 feet across the shoulder. These are the ones that say it look like, an elephant walking through the trees. These are the really big ones. They look a lot like a gorilla. These tend to be the most shy, the most kind of gentle, the ones that, people who probably doing things in the woods, these are the ones you're probably going to get away with the most stuff with. Even though they're the biggest, most gentle, they're kind of purported to be, they equally eat meat and brush. From people from encounters who've seen them up close, they say they have square teeth, a lot like a human. They have that sagittal crest along their head. That sagittal crest is all jaw muscles, so you can tell they're probably really good at chewing up roots and everything else. And these are the most common variety. These seems to be on the Pacific Northwest, although they're found all over the United States and in the Sierras and in the Rockies. And they're kind of your classic Bigfoot. If you, like I said, the Patterson-Gimlin, when you think of Bigfoot, this is what you think of. Now, the type 2 Bigfoots, which a lot of people are reporting, look really close to a chimpanzee.
Is this the wood booger?
Yes. This is what people call a wood booger. It's really funny when you think, a wood booger. But down in the South and the southern part of the United States where a lot of these things are being seen, how many people heard in the South, don't let the booger man get you. Don't let the boogeyman get you. Don't go out at night. Those boogers will haul you away. And it's kind of funny. I used to work with a guy who's in his late 60s now who's from Arkansas. And I asked him about it one day. And he just kind of laughed. And he's like, every town in the South has a story about the big hairy wild man booger that takes people in the middle of the nights, and he just kind of shrugged it off and said, everybody has those stories in the South. These are described as they don't quite get as big as the type ones. I mean, they still get 8, 9, 10 feet tall. They still get very large, but they're very chimp-like in the face. They're very easily excitable. Like if you look at a gorilla versus a chimp, the chimpanzees are a lot more excitable and easier to get going and tend to travel in packs and tend to screw with people more and steal things and be generally more dangerous. So that's kind of the wood booger type. They're found a lot in the South. I think because their bodies are a little smaller, you don't find them at as high as altitudes as you would the big type 1 types. Yeah, so that pretty much covers the 1 or 2. Did you have any questions on a type 1 or type 2?
I laughed because the wood booger, that name, I'm 31 years old, and that name still makes me laugh every time I hear it. And it wasn't the first time, because somebody had said something about, the wood booger when referring to a Bigfoot. And, you sometimes you hear about something about one of these oddities, I guess,
right?
Like aliens or ghosts or whatever. And it's like there are obviously some crazy people out there who will say, they'll say weird things, and you kind of take them as they are. But then you come to find out that the wood booger is a widely accepted term or widely accepted subspecies, or however you want to look at it.
Yeah, the name really got me too, because growing up, everybody talks about the boogeyman. Your mom scares you. The boogeyman will get you. And when I started hearing Southern accounts and people talking about these stories in their lore, and the boogers will get you, and I'm like, why do they call them boogers? Boogers come out of your nose. They're boogie, but it's just the way that they refer to them. So I had kind of the same reaction too. Like, why are they calling them wood boogers? I'm like, is that like tree snot? What's a wood booger? But I mean, I didn't come up with it, but it's just one of those kind of Southern mythos kind of a thing. And as you guys go on in your podcast, and as you guys grow and get to experience the paranormal stuff and look into it, you'll find at every small town, even here in Southern California, where there are millions of people, every city, every town, every canyon that has woods, there's something. Even here in Southern California, there's reports of weird things. Everybody has, the haunted lady lives in that mountain, or there's that swamp down there by the lake. There's a monster that lives in there. Every town seems to have something. And I think for the most part, a lot of it's stories. But, at the same time, I think there's a lot of it that, people are really seeing something. And that's what kind of goes back to the whole Bigfoot thing is you got to remember a lot of these accounts are just some guy who's a construction worker and his wife works at the grocery store and they're driving home late one night and something runs across the road that's 8 foot tall and hairy. And they're just like, what the hell was that? So, I think that's really for as many crazy people as you have that want to tell you about this and that and all the other stuff. There's just as many honest accounts and honest people out there that just they saw something and they don't know what it is. And to me, that's what really gets me.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to look at it. Which do you think came first, the wood booger or the boogeyman? Is there... See, now I'm curious if the boogeyman came from the wood booger or if the wood booger came from the boogeyman. But, I guess...
I honestly have no idea. I know that I'm guessing the wood boogers came first and the boogeyman. I know a lot of the Native Americans, especially in the Pacific Northwest, the Kwakwaka'Ewak tribe and a lot of the Pacific Northwest tribe, they have stories similar to what you hear all over the place that if you stay out at night, the wild woman of the woods is going to throw you in the basket and take you away. She's 8 foot tall and hairy, and they're referring to Bigfoots. So I think it goes back a long, long way, and a lot of Native cultures have that going back in the United States. Almost every tribe has a story of Bigfoots, of either being, kind of okay, we leave them alone, they leave us alone, to being terrible giants that carry people away. So I think it goes back even farther, a lot farther than, before the white man was here. That, and I think it was also kind of, you'd be sitting around the house and grandpa would tell you a story. Oh, yeah, back in '02 or whatever, we saw this big hairy thing walking around in the woods and it carried away one of our goats. Well, he saw Bigfoot, but he would tell the story to his grandkids or his kids to keep him in the house at night, So I think that's kind of where the boogeyman came from. Oh, stay out or the boogeyman will get you. They're probably talking about a Bigfoot most of the time.
You were talking about the old time, dads telling their kids get inside and
right.
Or the boogeyman's going to get you. And that's why, first of all, I think it's interesting because I've always heard of the boogeyman. And now I think about that could be the boogeyman is this Bigfoot. But that's one reason why I have a strong belief in there being a Bigfoot. If you go back, you'll have, back in the mid 1800s, there's reports in these little local newspapers of these hairy giant men in the woods, right? Well, you might have that report in Appalachia, BFE, and then get the same report of it in Texas, and obviously there's no Twitter or internet or phones or, so
correct.
These had to be legit sightings. And that's what I've always been fascinated with the Bigfoot thing is, and if you listen to the podcast and people that listen to the podcast know that I tend to be more skeptical. Skeptical. Yeah, I tend to be. Yeah, I tend to be more etch-a-sketch. I tend to be more of a skeptic than Tom does, but I do. I believe just based off that fact that you had these reports, and then you're talking about this. That maybe that's how the boogeyman got started. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say the type 1, the big patty gorilla looking type, and the type 2, the more chimpanzee looking type, a little more of a chimpanzee type face and a little more of a flat nose and highly excitable. These are probably the two most common. Now, there are type 3s and type 4s that we'll get into. And there's a lot of other cryptids and a lot of other things people are seeing. But for the most part, like 95% of the sightings you'll hear about, or if you could talk to these people, or if you could listen, or if you listen to a lot of podcasts or hear encounter stories, interviews, 95% of them are talking about a type 1 or a type 2. And I have no experience with this particular idea, but from what I've heard, there are people that have them in their yards and who live in the country and who are Bigfoot researchers who have habituated them in. And people tell me, or from what I've heard, is that they'll have type 1s and type 2s in their area. Well, they'll have the really big gorilla looking types. A couple of them will move through in a family group. And then, a few days later, or even, later on, they'll see the smaller, more chimpanzee looking types in a group. So, I mean, there's a certain amount that these things kind of cross over. And I don't know, they could even be interbreeding, kind of like how, I guess, way back in the day, humans and Neanderthals interbred. I mean, who knows? Or they just might be competing. How the same idea, how in certain parts of the United States we have white-tailed deer and mule deer, and other parts of the country we just have one. I have no idea. Like I said, this is all speculation. But most people, if they describe what they saw, it's going to either be like a type 1 or a type 2 most of the time.
It's funny that you say speculation because we specialize in speculation on this show. That's 90% of what we say is speculation. So don't feel bad at all. It's fun though because you talk about interbreeding and everything, and then you can kind of group that in with when you breed dogs for intelligent design, right?
Right.
You know, you have wolves that over the course of bajillions of years, or however many years, I'm horrible at the evolution track of how it all worked, but they
a bajillion sounds about right.
I could have made a more ridiculous number, but that was about all I had. So, you know, you have those, and they've just continued to naturally adapt and get better and better and better through natural breeding, and, you know, by having their alpha pack leader and their beta female pack, or their beta female, and they've just gotten better and better over time. But then we sit around and we do this intelligent design breeding with these dogs, and then they're coming out with eyes that get scratched on everything, or, you know, that tip over or die of kidney failure or whatever. So if we have, and again, speculation, you know what they say when you speculate, you know, so if they're interbreeding, but they're doing it on their own, that's natural selection, and that's going to end up with a super Bigfoot, hopefully. Well, hopefully for the case of interest or the case of intrigue, but hopefully not for the case of the survivability of man. But if it's government built, here's Dustin. Oh, it's the government, man. They're making Bigfoots. They're doing intelligent design for Bigfoots.
Well, I don't want to discount anybody's theory. And if you get into Bigfoot, eventually you'll come across that there's an extraterrestrial or an extra dimensional, as most people tend to say, with the government, working with the government, ancient alien, bioengineering. You start getting into, there's one type of Bigfoot is natural and indigenous, and the other type had some DNA manipulation. And I don't want to say that that's all BS, but at the same time, we're already speculating about big apes in the woods. Let's just kind of keep it at that for now. But yeah, there's some really out there theories on Bigfoot, just like you guys are into aliens and ghosts and paranormal and all that other kind of stuff. You can go down that road with Bigfoot. Some people do. I'm saying I don't discount anything or anybody. You should really always keep an open mind, but like you and your partner, just stay very healthy, skeptical of it. And from what I've read and from what I've seen, it's kind of like the difference between an African elephant and an Asian elephant. And then there's different pygmy elephants and there's forest elephants, just kind of like how a brown bear looks very different in Yellowstone National Park as it does in Alaska. So, and it's kind of like how wolves and coyotes can crossbreed, and on the East Coast, I think that's what a lot of the red wolves are. But for the most part, wolves and coyotes will stay separate. Will Bigfoot stay separate, the different types? Probably, but if they're forced to, will they interbreed? Maybe. It's all speculation. Other species that are close tend to do it. But it seems like back to what I was saying, about 95% of them either fit into a type 1 or a type 2. Basically, it looked like a huge chimp or it looked like a big gorilla. But yeah, we could go off all day and talk about the really out there stuff on how Bigfoot came about. But I think a lot of it just has to do with location and isolated groups, and just how accents are, like how we were saying with dogs, and how wolves, and how everything just kind of looks different when they get farther away from each other. And if you think of a big 12-foot tall Bigfoot, would probably do great in the Pacific Northwest, where it's wrestling grizzly bears and having to compete with mountain lions and break moose's legs to survive. But you put one down in a Florida swamp with the gators, and it's probably going to be better if it's more like 7 or 8 foot tall, a little thinner build, something that can move through the swamps in the heat. So it just kind of makes sense that if it was spread across the United States, you'd have ones that look different. But when you start getting into the type 3s and the type 4 Bigfoots, this is where you kind of start to get a little bit more out there, as far as I'm concerned. And then there's even speed, which I've categorized into like a type 5 or a type 6, where people are seeing something they're describing that doesn't quite fit with the Bigfoot mold. Where, it may be like 80% of a Bigfoot. Like, yeah, it was big, but it didn't really look like a gorilla or a chimpanzee in the face. And that's where a type 3 comes in. Type 3s have a protruding snout as they're purported. Now, they're somewhere, I would say they're pretty close to like a type 1 or a type 2, maybe somewhere in between. Pretty close to probably like a type 2, where they probably get 8, 9, maybe 10 foot tall at the max. But the type 3s are also known as a gugwe. I have no idea where that term came from. Maybe it's a Native American term or whatever. but they're also kind of known as, people call them a dog man, although I think when people see a dog man, I think they're seeing something different. This type of Bigfoot looks like your classic Bigfoot, but it has a protruding snout. It has a snout like a dog, or if you've ever seen a mandrill or you've ever seen a baboon, that kind of protruding snout with the wrinkles on it and the big fangs, teeth, that kind of a thing. People are seeing a Bigfoot, but with like a mandrill type head on it that's got those big fangs. And from what the Native Americans say about these type 3 Bigfoots and what people have reported, the Gugwe type, as they've been coined, are very nasty. These are strict carnivores. They have teeth and fangs and claws. They hunt. They're highly intelligent. And these are the ones that you hear, carrying people off to eat them. So, yeah, that's basically what you hear about a type 3. Luckily, they're very rare. They seem to kind of be along the Mississippi, Missouri River, kind of the central United States going down in the south. They seem to, they go all the way up to, say, like the Canada across the border, but they tend to be kind of central in the United States. And that's kind of what a type 3 is they have that baboon type mouth. And apparently they're very nasty and very mean.
You said these are kind of central to so basically Midwest almost.
Yeah. And if you've ever seen a bunch of baboons, like one of those documentaries, there'll be 4 or 5 lions, and these baboons come after them, and the lions are like, screw this, I'm out of there. So it's kind of funny that the Bigfoot categories, it kind of seem to have a wild animal analog to them. Like the type 1's looking like a gorilla, the type 2's looking chimp-like, the type 3's looking very aggressive and baboon-like. Yeah, so it just there's not much known about these. They're very rare. I guess they get very big. They get very, they're very intelligent and cunning. Yeah, I guess now that's the stuff that, like nightmares are made of. Now,
right.
There's something that people are reporting. I'm sure you guys are aware of the dog man, right? There's basically 2 things going on when you say the dog man. Now, there's like the Michigan dog man, and down in the south, they have the Rougarou, which for all intents and purposes, they look like a werewolf you'd see in the movies. They have that kind of, their back legs or their bottom legs, however you want to describe them, have that kind of dog rear hinged kind of a rear leg with the elongated foot kind of a thing going on. And they, really skinny at the waist, but really broad at the shoulders and have big gnarly fangs. People are reporting, I don't know about that, but people are reporting from the border across Mexico, all across the south, all the way up to Michigan, that there's a dog man-like creature that looks just like a werewolf, like you'd see in a movie. Really crazy, like a dog standing up on all right, but huge. Now, the type 3 Bigfoot is reported to not really look like a dog other than protruding snout. So there's a little bit of controversy out there because the type 3 Bigfoots, they have a normal human type knee that bends forward, and they look like a Bigfoot. They just have that snout versus a dog man, which a lot of people are seeing. Now, that's the stuff nightmares are made of, a dog man having a 7 or 8 or 9 foot tall, big, giant, fang, gnarly looking, something like Anubis or the devil himself has come out, and that stuff's scary. But there's definite, and when the dog man leaves tracks, purportedly, they leave like a big giant dog footprint. And if you look up dog man on the internet, you'll get a lot of scary images, but you'll also see where people have like a 7 or 8 inch dog print in their yard after seeing one of these things. So that's like a dog man. But what we were talking about is a type 3 Bigfoot, where they leave like a normal Bigfoot kind of human-esque track. They have big, broad shoulders. They look like a Bigfoot, but until you see their snout that sticks out. So that's the 3rd type. Did you guys have any kind of questions on that?
No, I don't think. I hope to never encounter a dog man, I guess.
I'm looking at videos of the dog man on YouTube right now, and
yeah, it would be bad enough if you look out your big, your master bedroom window and you see a Bigfoot staring in at you, and you think, wow, that's scary. It's a Bigfoot. It's some big human-like hairy thing. You see this big giant dog head staring in at you, and you think the devil's come for you.
Yeah,
you start getting into, and I break these all down into cryptids. These are all cryptids, cryptozoological, which is the study of undiscovered creatures by science. And I always break cryptids into 2 categories. There's, like the Bigfoot cryptid, where it seems like it's a real flesh and blood creature. They poop, they pee, they hunt, they walk around, they leave prints. And there's also, like the Tasmanian tiger. That's a cryptid because it's supposedly extinct, but people are still seeing it. Or, this lake has some, this lake reportedly has a crocodile in it or something, There's that kind of a cryptid. And then there's the other kind of a cryptid, like, I saw a werewolf, or I saw a chupacabra, or I saw, like a Slender Man-like creature, or the Rake, or something that you're getting off into kind of more like a demon, or, something really bad, So those are kind of the two categories of cryptids I kind of break everything down in. And I think for more or less the Bigfoot types, I think they're a flesh and blood creature. I think they're just really cunning. They're out in the woods and people have been seeing them for a long time. But when you start getting into the quote unquote dog man and the goat man and, the Loveland frog, and there's a lot of all these really weird ass cryptids out there that reputable people have seen, I think you might be seeing something really paranormal on those ends versus like a Bigfoot, which is kind of just a creature in the woods. So that's kind of how I break down cryptids.
You know what's funny to do? Ask Dustin to say cryptozoological.
Hey,
he can't do it.
Say cryptozoological. Oh, great. Now I can't say it. Good job.
Cryptozoological.
It's funny if you listen here. I'm going to shamelessly plug the show now. If you listen to the old ones, every single time he's ever tried to say cryptozoological, it sounds different each time. But it's never been the full word, which is a hard word to say sometimes when you're just trying to breeze through a sentence. Yeah. He gets hung up on it and then gives up halfway. So you got to listen for it.
It's kind of one of those words. I think you just say it and don't think about it. If you think about how you're going to say it, you're going to jumble it up. So, cryptozoological. But if you just come out and say it, you're fine.
So, back to the show, guys.
Come on, this is way more fun.
Out of these 4 types of Bigfoots, do you think there's a war between these 4
for the battling for the planet, for the woods?
No, seriously. I mean, do you think that these 4 types are in conflict, or are they living in harmony with each other?
Well, I definitely. Okay, real quickly, I'll go over the Type 4 just to kind of finish that up. And Type 4s, Type 4s look a lot like a Type 2 in build, where they're chimpanzee-like, 7-8 foot tall. They tend to be a little leaner, and the Type 4s are known as like a relic hominid. They're kind of like, if you think classic kind of hunched over caveman look, but big broad-shouldered, that's what people are describing in a Type 4 Bigfoot, is they look like a relic hominid. They look like it was the biggest, ugliest, dark, as in like gray-black skin, looking like it looked like a big, giant, oversized gorilla, but it had more of a human face. That's the 4th type of Bigfoot. But to answer your question of, do you think these things compete? And I think absolutely, because if you take a look at Yellowstone National Park, about 20 years ago, they reintroduced wolves. Well, wolves were there classically, but in the 20s or 30s, they shot them all out. What's that term? Evaporated, something like that. Anyway, they made them extinct in that area. And what happened when they reintroduced the wolves is the coyote populations really, really got hit, because the wolves would actively hunt the coyotes because they saw them as direct competitors. Well, as a result, the foxes really took it too, because the coyotes, who normally left foxes alone, or they kind of avoided each other, would start going after the foxes, and it kind of rolled downhill. So, yeah, absolutely. I think these groups would definitely compete with each other if they came in contact. But being relatively smart, just like, if you take groups of human beings, we come in contact and fight each other all the time. Or if you take a look at chimpanzees, chimpanzees will attack smaller monkeys and eat them all the time. They attack other troops of chimpanzees and eat them. I mean, most people think of chimpanzees as being kind of fun-loving, goofy, but they're really brutal guys, and they'll go out, there'll be a group of 20 or 30 over there, and you're in a group of 20 or 30, and they'll go attack them. So, yeah, I think absolutely they would probably come in contact and fight each other.
Let me ask you this. As far as the skunk ape, would you class that would be like a whole nother cryptid, right? It wouldn't fall into the category of these 4 types of Bigfoots?
Well, I think people would argue with me on this, but some people would say, yeah, that's like a type. If you're going to put them all into types, that's like a Type 5 or a Type 6. I think from reports of the skunk apes is they tend to be a little more reddish hair, and they tend to look a little more orangutan-like. I don't know enough information about the skunk apes. I mean, I've heard stuff about them, but I think they're like an offshoot of a Type 2. Okay. Personally, because like I said, every region of the United States has their version or their idea of the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch or the boogeyman, or like we're saying, the wood booger, or like a lot of Native American tribes have the hairy man or the big man or the wild man or the wild woman, and it could be something completely different, kind of like how Florida panthers are an offshoot of mountain lions, but they're but their genetics are a bit different than the other ones. It could be something like that, where from what I've heard, I just think they're kind of a genetically isolated population of type 2s. And that's kind of my theory on the skunk apes, and being in the swamps and being humid out, probably why they smell. I'm just guessing. And it's Florida. I don't know. It's hot and humid.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, I could be completely way off on that. But from the reports and imagery and things that I've seen, I think they're some kind of a geographically isolated type 2 population.
That would make sense because obviously for natural adaptation purposes, that doesn't apply specifically to recognized species of animals. It would probably have to apply to your cryptids.
Just say cryptids.
But yeah, it would obviously have to apply to them, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so to go back to your what you're saying about these creatures fighting each other, do you guys ever listen to Dark Waters? He has a YouTube channel.
No, I've never heard him. You heard him? No.
Dark Waters, he's this guy who lives down in Louisiana, and he's a great storyteller. And he does some Bigfoot stuff. He does some ghost, poltergeist, paranormal stuff. But he does his kind of niche he kind of fell into is he does a lot of dogman stories. Now, I don't mean type 3 dogman. I mean like werewolf, hinged leg, runs in a pack, howls at the moon, straight out of the depths of hell dogman type stories. And these things will, I mean, you will poop your pants. Don't listen to them late at night if you want to be scared. And a lot of these stories are people who want to remain anonymous. Like, hey, let me tell you my family story down in Louisiana or in Tennessee or in Kentucky or in Mississippi, somewhere in the deep South, way out in the woods, out in the rural country. We got these things running around, and let me tell you our story about this. Well, what was reported is I think it was the Choctaw tribe, which is a real tribe, and some other tribe, I don't know the name of it, reported that there was some war between the Dogman and the Bigfoot going on, and the Indians ended up stealing this is all kind of third, fourth hand story here, so I'm probably way off. But it was just absolutely fascinating because there was a story about how the Native Americans, the Indians, were having problems with these Dogmen. So what they did is they went and stole a skull from the Bigfoots. They went into the Bigfoot territory and went to one of their burial mounds, and I guess 2 Indians went in, and one of them got decapitated by the Bigfoot, but the other one made it out with the skull. And when the Indian tribes, they took this skull and put it deep into the Dogman territory, well, this caused the Bigfoots and the Dogmans to have some big brutal fight. If you want to picture some 7, 8, 9 foot tall werewolf thing with horrible fangs and some 7, 8, 9 foot tall, big, strong gorilla type Bigfoot battling it out and throwing rocks and clubbing each other. And I mean, now that would be a show to watch. But yeah, the Indians have stories of this. Well, I guess it backfired on the Indians to why they abandoned this land in this story is that since the Dogmen were there, the Bigfoots were there, and these tribes were there, well, the Bigfoots and the Dogmen ate all the deer and ate all the bear and everything else that lived in the area. So they eventually had to move on because there was so much competition. But to hear, Native Americans have stories about these different cryptids fighting each other is just absolutely insane. So to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of reports and stories and lore of these things fighting each other.
And it's funny because I've never heard about any of these, obviously any of the, I never heard of like the Dogman in the way that he's being described now, as far as, the difference between the Bigfoot Dogman and the Dogman Wolf Dogman. I've never heard, I've never heard of the distinction between the two. And, now I'm hearing about, and like you said, that sounds like a wild thing to see. Like, can you imagine watching Bigfoots fighting werewolves? That would be.
Like it'd be cool to see. I still imagine it happens today, but the government controls the fights.
Here we go. You got an octagon with a Bigfoot versus a Dogman.
Yeah, it would be one of the most mind-blowing things ever to see. But, for the Native Americans to have these kind of stories, it's like, and for that to be the reason, we don't go on the canyon over there. We stay out of that territory because the Bigfoot and the Dogman drove us out. It's like, excuse me? So, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there.
We always used to joke about, I don't even remember what the story was exactly, what 2 scary things, but if you were ever far enough away from something like that, And it was a similar situation where it would be like, just if you'd imagine a dog man versus a Bigfoot, you know, you see them fighting and you know you're safe, like you're far enough away right now to witness it and just enjoy the show. But at the same time, you're like, what if the wind shifts? What if one of them starts moving? I don't want to be
part of the show.
Exactly. You know, and you're like, I want to watch, but at the same time, I got to think about the fact that, you know, that thing might, you know, they might make their way over here. And then at that point, it might be too late for me, you know, and that was, again, I wish I remembered what the story was with it, but it was something equally as scary as a dog man versus a Bigfoot.
I just wonder who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
I'm just going to have to say, personally, from what I've heard of reports, the dogmen are the bad guys. Not that, you know, we're humans and we like to break everything into black and white. I think if the Bigfoots are kind of a light medium gray, and I think the dogmen are like dark gray, because there's plenty of stories of people who've had dogmen go through their backyard, like, oh yeah, this time of year we see them in the backyard all the time, but they leave me alone and they leave them alone. And it's like, dude, you got a freaking family of werewolves in your backyard and you don't think anything of it. It's like, you know, they leave me alone. But you hear stories like that. And, you know, then you get stories of, you know, Bigfoot carrying people off and popping their heads off and eating them and wanting to do things to the women that they abduct. And so, you know, you can't say one side is good or bad, but I would definitely say a giant werewolf is going to be more on the side of evil than a Bigfoot. So,
well, right. I mean, there's good and bad is relative anyways. So it's kind of like a human construct anyhow. So they, and plus with the Choctaw tribe being kind of the instigate, that is what we're essentially saying here is that man is actually the bad guy in that situation, because we're the ones who started that whole rift between the two. They had otherwise been living peacefully to some degree until a Bigfoot skull appeared deep in dogman territory. So that's wild. That's interesting stuff.
Yeah, you guys hit upon something that's super common. A lot of people who report Bigfoot, where they see him from a hunting stand, or they're driving in the middle of the night and one comes crossing the road within inches of their bumper, or old lady lives in the country and looks out her window and there's a Bigfoot staring at them. You hear a lot of people say what you guys said, where, yeah, I was scared, but I wish I could have saw the Bigfoot 250 yards away through a spotting scope in Yellowstone National Park, like with the binoculars watching bears at 100 yards away, you know?
Right.
You hear a lot of people say that, and that's kind of my advice to people who go out in the woods looking for Bigfoot, and they go knock on trees and they go do all their howls and do all the crazy stuff that people do to go look for Bigfoot. Is careful what you wish for. You might hope that you're looking at it through a pair of binoculars and you have no idea that's there. What's more than likely going to happen is you're going to come around a corner and you're going to be 8 or 10 feet. Like, you can feel its breath is probably what's going to happen. And that's way too close. The only thing I can liken it to is like, I went camping in Yosemite National Park, got up in the middle of the night, came back to go to the bathroom, came back in my campsite, and I was within 3 feet of a big giant male black bear, the bear I'd ever seen. And I saw him the next day in the daylight. He was really beautiful, kind of a nice chocolate brown, very healthy, big giant boy. And if it had been just a regular roadside, like, hey, honey, look out the window, there's a bear, you know, or going through some meadow watching him, it's fine. But in the middle of the night, when I damn near tripped over him, and we're like, if I would have leaned forward, I mean, literally, he was so close, I could have leaned and probably patted him on the head. He was that close, and that's way too close. And I think that happens. You'll find that with a lot of Bigfoot encounters where people are like, oh, I was, sitting in my chair 3 feet from the window, and I turn around and it's right on the other side of the glass breathing. We're like 5 feet away. Or people camping, looking in their tent, or they're mountain biking and come around a corner and they're, face to face with one. And so that's actually a very common thing that you said is everybody wishes that you could see it from the spotting scope or from way up on a tree, or I'm up on a mountainside looking down in a meadow and watching it. But unfortunately, you don't get to pick how you see these things.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a question that I think a lot of people have, and hopefully you have a reasonable answer for it. In a world, right, or in a time where everybody has a phone on them at all times or a camera on them at all times, and we have surveillance nonstop from the government, we have people out and about doing stuff, we have more population now than we had back in 1960s when the Patty video came out. But why is it, with all that taken into consideration, do we not have a better understanding or better video, more pictures of any of these types of Bigfoots?
Well, do you want the conventional answer or do you want the weirdo out there conspiracy answer?
Both of them, preferably.
Okay, well, the short answer is, and I'll be a little bit of anecdotal evidence, going back to bears, I've gone to Yellowstone Park a bunch of times, and they have big grizzly bears up there and other assorted critters. And from the naked eye, you're like, wow, it's a bear. I can see its eyes. I can see its ears twitching. I can see its teeth, and you might even be able to hear it. You pull out your phone, even the best iPhone or Android or whatever you got, or even a real nice camera, and you start taking pictures of it, and you're like, yeah, I got great pictures. And you go back and look at it, and you're like, hey, buddy, see the bear picture? And they're like, that's just a rock. It's really, and I'm talking about, an 800-pound grizzly bear in a meadow. And you don't know how many pictures of bears I have that look just like a goddamn rock, because it's like, no, I swear it's a bear. So you take a creature that's in the woods and is the master of disguise, the big forest ninja, and then you do try to take a picture, and then you're all pumped up and you're shaking because you're like, oh my God, it's a Bigfoot. And most of the time you hear a lot of stories, people have a Bigfoot sighting. They completely forget that they had a phone on them. Hunters completely forget that they had a gun on them. People don't, the last thing on their mind was taking a picture. Usually it's self-preservation. And the people who are smart enough to take a picture, usually they're shaking. They're going through some kind of a camera, usually like a cell phone. And, you're just not going to get that great of a quality. And this kind of transitions into the more out there theories. I think if you got some really, really clear, like Patty type footage, and you put it on the internet, I'm not saying who it is or where it's coming from, but I think those videos would be taken down, or unknown sources would come out and discredit you, saying, oh, it's a fake. It's a guy in a suit. This guy's a crackpot. This guy's, he's a shyster. He's trying to make money off of it. So, yeah, I think there's things out there where there's a lot of cameras and there's a lot of information, but necessarily, it's just like, how come we haven't ever gotten a really good ghost on camera? Or every UFO film or video you've ever seen is just like it's a dot in a sky moving. Things don't necessarily translate well to cameras. And when you're talking about something that's not supposed to be in the woods, the general reaction of a human being is just to be shocked and watch it. Even if you take the known animal species, like how many cell phone pictures of mountain lions are there? Well, there's mountain lions everywhere, especially out here in California. Not that many, because your first reaction is, oh, crap, a mountain lion. And usually they're just going to cross the road, look at you, and run across the road before you could even get a camera out. So those are kind of the explanations for why you'll never see that great of footage, I don't think. Is I think there are good footage and there are good trail camera photos. I think there's some organization, something out there that's censoring these things on the internet, and also just blind luck. I think it's just really, really hard to take a picture of them. I'm going to rant a little bit longer here. There was something I was hearing about a couple of years ago. It was on another podcast I was listening to, where they did this experiment. I think it was the BFRO or some Bigfoot research organization, where they sent a bunch of people out in the woods with cell phone cameras and regular cameras. And they said, our guy is dressed as a pink Sasquatch. I mean, bright pink, hot pink, hairy Sasquatch. They got some big fuzzy pink monster outfit. And he went up on this hillside and just sat on a log. You know what? 5 or 6 teams of people, nobody saw him. Completely unnoticed. And we're talking a normal woodsy type forest, and nobody saw him, much less even got a picture of him. And he wasn't trying to hide. He was just sitting there in the pink. And they interviewed the guy sitting in the costume, and he's like, oh yeah, people walked right by me. Not right by me, but they were 50, 60 yards away. They just didn't see me or didn't notice me. And they were actively looking for me. So I just thought that was kind of a funny story. So
yeah, that's funny. No, it's funny because we were joking about the government and stuff, but I do agree with you. I think that these things are out there and the government's covering it up. They don't want us to know about it for whatever reason. But there's too many people that see these things, have encounters, for it not to be true.
Right.
And the biggest thing that comes down to is, where does it fall in? Is it alien? Is it paranormal? Or are these just a big ape? A big ape that's living in the woods. But I definitely do. It's something that I can't, with all the experience, with all the sightings, with all the reports, there's no way that this thing's not out there. Even the things that you've witnessed.
Right.
How do this many people have these experiences and it just be a made up thing,
Right. Yeah. And like I said, not only they're incredibly hard to get footage from, I think the reason why you have the Patterson-Gimlin film, it was back in 1967. It was an oddity. No one knew what it was. There wasn't any big censorship. There wasn't the internet. So it kind of just got tongue in cheek. And there was a lot of people over the years that tried to discredit that film. And every time they try to discredit it, they get real doctors, real biologists, real scientists that come out and say, no, this isn't a guy in a suit. This is really something you're looking at. And I think the only reason we have the Patterson Gimlin is because it was before whatever's responsible for the censorship of the subject got really big into it. There's tons of reports of semi-trucks hitting these things and people, hitting them on the side of the road, and, the body disappears and people get told to shut up about it. And like they saw a bear, there's just too much going on. I don't know what it is, but someone is trying to censorship these sightings. Now, people would ask why. I think the more the mundane reasons are like, oh, it's because of the logging industry. It's because it would be an endangered species and we'd have to protect it. We'd shut down our national forest and our national parks. I think the real reason why someone would want to cover this up is, I think much like grizzly bears and mountain lions, they are a predator. And I think occasionally they take people. I think they abduct people. I think they eat people, just like bears do and mountain lions do occasionally. And I think if that information got out, I think that would be very detrimental to, since they've covered it up this far, they kind of have to keep going. You're going to say all these people that went missing in the woods, hundreds and thousands of people that have gone missing in the woods for the last 200 or 300 years could possibly have been eaten by a Bigfoot? Or I take my kids to these woods and there's Bigfoots in these areas and you didn't warn us. So I think there's a lot of liability there too. And so I think there's a lot of reason for, say it's the government or some other organization or whoever's pulling the strings. I think there's a lot of reason to cover them up. So I kind of think that's what's going on there with it.
A person is smart. People are stupid and panicky, as they say. So You could personally tell me, no, Bigfoot is real. We have all the evidence that we need to prove to you that he is real. We can take you back to our building over here where we keep a Bigfoot that is alive and we keep him in a simulated forest or whatever.
Habitat, yeah.
And, we can show him to you, but we cannot show him to everybody because it will create this huge panic. And like you said, it'd be horrible for, I think it could be a little bit of both. It would be the mundane reasons and the more outlandish reasons of kill the tourists or the tourism industry, scare people away from going to, what wasn't Yellowstone actually already hurting for in the national parks and everything? They were hurting for tourism, so that would be horrible for them as well. And like you said, when you say conspiracy and the crazy kind of out there reasons for censorship and everything like that, I don't think that's that far off, because how much stuff are you at least 90% certain or more exists, and yet people keep telling you, oh no, it's fake, and they'll do that to you, and they will purposely censor it, like when they say there's no such thing as aliens, there's no such thing as intradimensional or interdimensional beings, and so on and so forth.
Right.
You're at least pretty sure that no one would be able to actually say, no, that's not real. And yet they still do. And even recently, 4chan, which is notorious for trolling people or doing these big goofs and everything like that. But they had that whole instance where somebody shared a picture that they said it was an actual picture of an alien. It was really weird. I didn't actually even end up being able to see it, but then they shared, it was so screwed up because somebody shared a picture that they said was an alien, and then this picture,
I think I know what you're talking about, by the way, and I think I remember seeing it, and I think I remember looking at the picture going, wow, that's a really creepy picture, but not being sold on it.
Right. And that was the thing about it, was they re-released a picture that somebody recreated who had seen it, was the thing, how when they finally re-released it, but the original picture disappeared, and then when people had saved it was no longer on their hard drives. It was no longer, anyone who put it somewhere else, when they tried to archive the thread and everything like that, it was all wiped away. The thread kept 404ing, and it was just it was one thing after another of them saying, well, this is really weird, how come we can't get this picture out to everybody?
Right.
Whether it was true or not, I don't know. And like I said, and I think we can all agree that 4chan is notorious for that type of behavior, but at the same time, it's something that I have no difficulty whatsoever believing there's some truth to it. So when you say censorship and somebody censoring it, that's not at all something that I have a hard time believing.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of Bigfoot researchers. I know down in East Texas in the Sam Houston National Forest, that's one of the Bigfoot capitals of the world down there, apparently, for super aggressive, ballsy Bigfoot that'll come out in the open, mean encounters, strange stuff happening is in the big thicket down there, which is the Sam Houston National Forest. And there's been reports, not going to name any specific names, but I remember hearing a Bigfoot researcher say, who was being interviewed on a podcast and on his YouTube channel, that yeah, I got really clear footage. It's better than the Patterson-Gimlin. Good daylight color footage of this thing walking across the road. This footage is going to shake up the world. Who do I send it to? Who do I post it? And as he's looking at his laptop, he's not touching the mouse, but the cursor's moving and stuff and files are being deleted off of his computer. You know, like if you ever had an IT guy at work take over your computer?
The remote access.
Yeah, the remote access. And, you know, he's just some kind of a, you know, kind of more of a country guy who doesn't really know what's going on. He's like, it was the craziest thing. My mouse is moving and files are being deleted off my computer and blah, blah, blah. And, I saved about half my files because I was able to disconnect from the internet from it. And you hear a lot of stories where, you know, or say somebody like me goes out and gets really good footage. Then I put it on my YouTube channel. You know, maybe it's up a day, 4 hours, 12 hours, 10 hours. A bunch of people saw it, it goes viral, then it just gets taken out. Or it gets to the point where so many people have seen it and so many people have recorded it and it's out there that even if they take down my video, there's nothing they can do. That's already been shared enough on the internet. So what they do is they would then discredit me saying, oh, look at him, he bought a suit, or he was talking to his friend, some anonymous people on the internet saying, oh, he's a fake. I remember he was saying this and he was going to buy, and look, from Amazon, he bought a Bigfoot costume, you know, or something like that. They would find a way to discredit. Now, going back to the ultimate point here of the government's covering it up, and as much as I always want to be like with aliens and with Bigfoot, but especially the whole alien thing, because if you get into the whole aliens, they always talk about disclosure. Like, when are they going to disclose it? When are they going to disclose aliens? When are they going to disclose Bigfoot? And it's like, I used to be we want the truth, man. We can handle it. Give it to me. You know, the truth will set you free. And I'm not saying that, yes, I want the truth to come out about Bigfoot as much as all the other strange stuff that happens in the world. But devil's advocate, I can see why the government does it. It totally makes sense to me. And for all the Bigfoot sightings that are all around the United States, everywhere, even, you know, in larger towns, you know, like a town of like 100,000 people has sightings of these things in the middle of town digging through dumpsters, you know, and I kind of see where the government's coming from. I hate to say it. I don't want to be on the government side here, but I see why they're doing it. You know, it makes complete sense.
Well, you see how people handle any little thing that comes out, and the government's already got enough that it's got to deal with in a given day. The last thing they probably need is a panic or like a huge panic amongst all the people. So that's it makes sense why I agree with you. I see where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of people can appreciate that while at the same time not liking it.
I mean,
exactly.
Look how bad people freaked out when they were running into Hillary Clinton in the woods. Imagine if it was Bigfoot, man. I mean,
Skeletor. Oh no, it's just Hillary.
What type of Bigfoot is she, do you think? Which one does she fall under?
She's the northern variety. Even though she's from Arkansas, I think they've immigrated into the northern variety. They're what they call a Wendigo or a shapeshifter. She may look like an old lady, but there's teeth and fangs in there. So.
I think we actually called her a reptilian on one of the episodes. We referred to because of the smell and the scaliness and
yeah. Well, I would just be trying to get my wife away from Bill if I ran into him in the woods.
Look, you're not getting your wife away from Bill. Once he sets his sights on someone, it's over for that person. So.
It's like no, honey, run. Why? It's Bill Clinton.
The good news is you'll get a settlement out of it, so don't even worry about it.
Honey, save the dress. That's terrible. I know. It's okay. That's what the Spanish call El Terrible. Yeah. Anyway, so do you guys want to talk a little more about Bigfoot, or you want to wrap it up? What do you want to do?
I think we can probably wrap it up. What we're going to do is we're going to end up linking to your YouTube and everything and your Twitter and everything, if that's okay. We'll link to that on the website under our...
Well, absolutely. I mean, after the check comes for this interview, I would assume you'd help plug my...
Dustin's going to make sure that happens, right? You're going to pay
the check's in the mail.
Okay. Yeah, you got my address already?
Yeah. We got your address already, man. Don't worry about giving it to us.
Click. What's that? Somebody play the dial tone sound.
We're sorry.
Go on and you want to go on and plug your stuff real quick, man? We'll get you recorded on plugging your websites or your YouTube channel, whatever.
Okay, yeah. If people want to see my videos or know more about me, my YouTube channel is Mattsquatch Presents. It's MATTSQUATCH, just like Sasquatch, but with Matt on the front of it. And Presents, like Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Mattsquatch Presents, my YouTube channel. I'm also on Twitter at Real Mattsquatch and on Instagram at Real Mattsquatch. And they can follow me on there. I post 2 or 3 videos a week. I've got quite a few theory videos out there explaining different things and some of the basic stuff about Bigfoot, some more advanced things. And also coming up in October, I've got an expedition planned with a couple friends of mine. If you guys want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's going to be mid-October. We're going back to the area where I had my first encounter in the Sierra Nevada mountains, just east of Sequoia National Park. We got a couple GoPros. We got a couple trail cameras. We've got digital voice recorders. We've got a couple nice DSLR cameras, and we've got a plan. We're going to go out there and see if we can find any evidence, footprints, stick structures. You know, obviously, if we see something, we're going to try doing some recordings and just we're going to spend 3 days in the woods and seeing if we can come up with any evidence. And I'm going to do a whole video series on that coming up in October.
I think that'll be a lot of fun. A lot of people, you know, we have some people who are exclusively want to hear about paranormal stuff. Some people who exclusively want to hear about aliens and stuff. So the people who exclusively or want to hear about Bigfoot, or the people who are just curious a little bit more, you gave kind of a down and dirty version of some of your theories and some of the descriptions of the Bigfoots. But if people want to learn more in-depth versions, I know your videos go a little bit more in-depth. They're more stuck to one particular Bigfoot at a time. So if people want to hear more about it, they can definitely check out your videos and get a more in-depth version of that particular type of Bigfoot. But
well, there's one more quick thing I'd like to say about the expedition.
All right.
Not only are we going up there for Bigfoot, but this particular place we're going to is known as Battle Mountain. And there was some big cavalry Indian battle that went on 100 years ago, and I guess there's all sorts of Indian burial grounds and ghosts and orbs and strange things that happen up there. So for your audience, not only are we going to be out there looking for Bigfoot, but if we see any strange orbs or any strange voices or pretty much anything paranormal, we're going to be out there with our cameras and recorders ready. So we're primarily there for Bigfoot, but there's a lot of history in the area we're going on, so we're kind of ready for anything that happens paranormal wise. So we're hoping it turns out good.
And that's the sort of thing that you're going to be excited about.
Yeah, we have big plans for the future, so maybe hopefully one day we can make our way out there and go on a little expedition with you.
We can go check out some of your Bigfoot locations and the Indian burial ground. That's scary to me. Like my backyard is right up against an Indian burial ground where when they were building the subdivision, they actually found a bunch of Native American artifacts while they were digging. So they had to put everything back.
Scary.
Yeah, they had to put it all back and smooth it all over because they were going to build a house there, but then they found all that stuff and they said, well, I think there's a law that says that they can't actually build on top of those types of grounds. So they put it all back, and we have my backyard runs right up against the Indian burial ground. So they I don't ever really mess around in there, but you know, around 3:15 every morning I started calling the noises and the
witching hour.
Exactly. Yeah. I started referring to the poltergeist in my house as the chief, who there's all sorts of weird stories that have happened with him in my house in the middle of the night, and I refer to him as the chief, and my kids have seen somebody walking around the house, and it's
that's creepy.
Yeah, so I always chalk it up to being the Indian burial ground. So that'll be interesting for you. Hey, we appreciate you coming on the show, man. Thank you very much.
No problem. Hey, well, don't make me sound too crazy, please.
I'm gonna specifically change it and add extra stuff in that makes you sound crazier.
You guys are gonna hang up and go, "Wow, that guy was out there, huh?"
No, well, the thing is, you'll be able to hear us. So whatever nasty, horrible things we say about you, once we hang up on the call, you'll be able to hear later on. So you can just honestly
I will go on social media and ruin you if I have to. So,
believe it or not, you can't ruin us any more than we already are.
I will go on the internet and spend a whole 15 or 20 minutes ruining you, leaving negative comments.
And I'm the kind of guy, like, if you look at my personal Twitter, I take those horrible insults that people say about me and I quote retweet them and say another personal endorsement. So like I love a good endorsement like that. So please.
Do you have a business? Because I will leave such a bad Yelp review.
We'll make one so that you can leave a bad Yelp review. How's that?
Okay, guys, it was a lot of fun. I'll talk to you guys again.
Thanks again.
Let me know if you guys ever want me back on. So.
Absolutely. I mean, we're gonna hit you up all the time, anyways, as our resident. Even though you say you're not an expert on Bigfoot, you're our Bigfoot expert. So we're going to resort to you anytime we have a question.
We just adopted you. You just now are figuring that out.
Adopted by Kentuckians. How great.
Yeah. You should be so proud.
All right, we appreciate it.
Okay, guys.
You have a good night.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I say boom boom boom, no everybody say well.
No.
Boom boom boom, no let me say well.
No.
Say boom boom boom, no everybody say well.
Hello?
Say boom boom boom, no let me say well.
Hello?
Say boom boom boom, no everybody say well.
Notice.
I can hear you just fine.
It's the Outer Brothers.
Yes.
Back in the room.
You guys okay?
Ready to rock the world with the boom. So I hope you can stand the vibration. Because we're about to rock the entire nation.
I can hear you.
Alright? Here we go.
Say boom boom boom, no let me say well.
Technical difficulties.
What horrible things do you have to say about him?
Well, he broke our microphones. So we've never had a technical problem like that. And thank you very much for doing this,
Mattsquatch.
Mattsquatch.
Which is a clever name. Like,
yeah.
as simple as it is, it's actually pretty funny.
As far as like 1 to 5 Bigfoots, it's 5 Bigfoots, because not that it's really even something that's the 1 to 5 Bigfoot rating kind of is weird for someone like him, but just because he's not really claiming anything crazy. But you're a very humble person, Matt, because you were saying, I'm not an act, but I tell you what, you were pretty informative, and I hopefully we can get you on the show quite often, and hopefully we can seriously be able to come out there to California and do a Sasquatch hunt with you. That'd be crazy.
It's funny, like what you were saying about him not being, or him thinking that he wasn't an expert, but like, what defines being an expert really? I mean, like, the guy knows more about Bigfoot than I can say I don't know anybody who knows more about Bigfoot than he does. And so for him to say, I'm not an expert.
Because
who determines that? Like, there's not like a degree plan in any particular university that I'm aware of where, somebody becomes a PhD in cryptozoology. So
like, I can tell you that I am an expert at watching YouTube videos at work. Okay.
But I mean, he's done all this research.
Yeah. No,
so
seriously.
He's, more of an expert.
He was very knowledgeable, and it was awesome. You're awesome, Matt.
He's over here blushing.
You're so awesome,
He's
Matt.
so good. All these hearts are coming off of his head. But no, yeah, I agree. 5 Bigfoots, because, and again, like you said, it's not like I guess if you were going to give him a rating based off of him, you would have to go based off of his experiences. And I have no reason to believe that he's lying about his experiences about a rock being thrown at him, like a big rock being thrown at him while he's out in the woods, and his other experiences. I have no reason not to believe. Those don't sound like something that wouldn't happen. And it's not like he was definitively saying, and I think he even came back and said, could it have been something else? Sure, I don't know, who knows? And he was very kind of like our last guest, where he was just, I assume it was this. It really seems like this, and based off of the experiences I've read elsewhere, this is what it seems like. And he's not out there sharing pictures of something that could have been a hoax or anything.
Well, except I believe Matt on his Bigfoot account, or maybe more than I do the alien abductee.
You believe him more than the abductee?
Yeah.
Well, it's easier to. You're right. I agree with you. It's harder to not believe Matt, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's harder to not believe him about that, because that's something that could happen.
That event's what made him really dive into Bigfoot, right? Isn't that what he was saying?
Yeah, that was one of them.
Like, he was knowledgeable, like he knew of Bigfoot, but that happening in the woods that day is what made him ultimately start delving into Bigfoot, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I give him a 5 Bigfoots for sure. And,
I agree,
and I think hopefully now he'll be our resident Bigfoot expert.
And with everything else, he's just giving us what he has from his reading up and thinking about it. It's not like he's saying, hey, this is my info. He's almost like that guy who wrote that article about the 6 aliens species, where he's like, I'm just giving you what I've gathered from years of research.
This may not be true at all, but my research says.
So it's hard to say say anything other than a 5 because he's just giving us what he has and based off of what he's studied and what he's gathered and what he's put together and what little he did kind of assume is totally logical and reasonable. So it's not like he's coming from a place of...
Well, what I like about him is I personally have learned a lot from this show today. You know, just talking about the Native American story about the dog man and the Bigfoot battles and, you know, the boogeyman and booger man, whatever. So again, that kind of goes to it's not like he's a guy who's just making this stuff up and just spewing out some fake news stuff. You can tell that he's researched a lot and he understands it all and he's passionate about it. And that's all that matters is that he's passionate about it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and he could have been just like any other person who talks about Bigfoot and says, oh, well, the basic information that you can gather from... I would have never thought to look into where he went into the Choctaws with the dog man versus the Bigfoot. That was an interesting extra story that he told us. And we, you know...
And that was not planned at all.
Yeah, that was... I don't think anyone had even asked him about that. That was just something that he said, oh, you guys might get a kick out of this too. And I'm glad he did tell that story because that's a horrifying story. Like, imagine being in that situation where, you know, you and a buddy go and come up with this hilarious plan of like, let's steal the Bigfoot skull and put it in the Dogman area so that the Bigfoot thinks that the Dogman stole it, and then they're gonna fight and and that'll get rid of both of them or whatever, or they'll be so preoccupied with that. But just imagine being like the age we are now as the members of that particular tribe, and then all of a sudden you see in the distance when you're out hunting bison, you see a couple of like 14 foot beasts fighting. You know? Like I imagine, you know, the Bigfoot with like a giant bone club and then the dog man gnawing at him. But you know, and that's horrifying. That's a terrible thing that I'd never ever in a million years want to see. And then at that point you're kind of like, you can't live there anymore. Like even once you see it, you're like, it's so close that it's within like a day's travel or whatever, however far out they had decided to venture that day when they discovered or when they saw it. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, we can no longer live here because we are within a day's travel of, you know, these giant monsters. And I guess even further, why on earth would you live that close to, you're aware of the Dogman existing, you're aware of the Bigfoot existing, why on earth would you decide to live in that particular area anyways, to where there are two horrifying monsters, you know, living within whatever distance that you're aware of them? I don't know, but that was an interesting story. That was a fun story. I'm gonna actually look a little bit more into that. So 5 Bigfoots. All right, with all that being said, you can follow us on Twitter at You Had Me Podcast,
or like us on Facebook, You Had Me Podcast.
You can email us at contact@youhadmeatbigfoot.com.
And check out our website, www.youhadmeatbigfoot.com, for our podcast, news, and links to reference material.
As always,
this is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in the most peculiar way.
And this is
Rocket Man, burning out his fuse out here alone. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, 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 I'm a rocket man.